webinar in collaboration with South East London Chamber of Commerce. We are here from Woodcock Law and Notary Public, and today's webinar will be on sponsor licenses, the license application and management system. And just so you know, the webinar is being recorded, and we will be running a Q&A session later on. So just to introduce your host today for the webinar.
Sorry, I was. Hello there. My name's Terry, and I'm from the South East London Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and I assist the office with the events and all the day-to-day running of the office. And we look forward to listening to this presentation from Papia and Roshni. Yes, I hope I got that right.
Yes, yeah.
I will say back over to you, ladies, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Terry, and thank you for the introduction. So just to add on to the introduction, my name is Papia Kabir. I work for Woodcock Law and Notary Public as a paralegal. We specialise in corporate and personal immigration, and my key area of interest is sponsor license. So I am one of the sponsor license specialists here at Woodcock Law and Notary Public. In addition to that, I'm also the certified acceptance agent for Woodcock Law and Notary Public. So I do assist individuals to obtain their EIN numbers, and I'm regulated by the IRS. But for the purposes of this webinar, I do have my paralegal hat on. So if you have any questions, you can see our LinkedIn details and also a telephone number. I'll now let my co-host introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Roshni and I'm a paralegal working alongside Papia, specialising more on the skilled worker front. So that would be the process thereafter and the sponsor licence application. I also deal in corporate and personal immigration.
Perfect. As you can see on the screen as well, we are in collaboration with South East London Chamber of Commerce, but our LinkedIn handles are also on the screen, as well as our work telephone numbers. So should you need any assistance, please do reach out. In addition to that, and for those who have joined today, we are offering a free 30-minute consultation for any SELC members. You can see the quotation on your screen right now, so please make a note of that. We usually do offer paid consultations, but for those who have joined the webinar today, we are offering a free 30-minute consultation in relation to any of your immigration queries and in particular to the sponsor license application. As part of this webinar, we will be going through what usually happens in a consultation, just so you can make sure that you are well equipped and you can come to us with the right questions and the right ideas in terms of what the webinar and what a sponsor license will hold. So please do make note of the quotation reference number. We will also be flagging this up at the end of the webinar. In addition to this, and should you have any questions throughout the webinar, please note we are hosting a question and answer session at the end in the last 15 minutes. So any questions that you do have, please do reserve until the end of the webinar. We do hope that you enjoy our webinar and that it's informative. And if you do have any questions and concerns, as I said, we will be addressing that later on. So just before we move on to going on about our firm and what it is we do, I am sure that you have joined onto this webinar today because you are interested in a sponsor license. Just to set the scene a bit, in case you have joined the webinar and you don't know much about the sponsor license, you don't know how it could help your business. I'm just going to set the scene slightly. So if you are a small to medium-sized enterprise, so for example, a restaurant, a convenience shop, a local beautician, and you are seeing issues with maintaining your staff numbers, you are having issues with retaining any staff that you currently have, or dealing with the current job market, which I know is an ongoing crisis here in the UK, and you are looking to seek out migrant workers who you can sponsor for a period of 3 to 5 years, or just have security for your business, then you have joined the right webinar. This is something that we can tailor make to you through the sponsor license route offered by the Home Office. So if I've mentioned anything that might, briefly match what you are currently going through as a business, you're looking to expand your business, you wish to retain your staff numbers and keep growing, then please do stay within this webinar and listen to what we have to say as the next steps, just so that we can offer you a great solution to this. So I'm just going to pass over to Roshni, who will carry on our introductions before we get into the webinar.
Okay, so just a brief introduction as to what we do here at Woodcock Law and Notary Public. So as per our name, we do specialise in immigration law and we offer notary services. So alongside notary services, we also deal with the legalisation and apostle service process, which goes hand in hand with the notary service. We also deal with visa and consular services, and we also liaise with the IRS to obtain ITIN for individuals claiming tax from the US.
As you can see on our screen, we are accredited by several governing bodies. So we have got the Law Society on this, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and also the IRS, amongst many others. If you would like to know more about what we do, aside from immigration law, do get in contact with us. Without further ado, we are going to jump straight into the webinar that you have joined us for today. So as I mentioned, this webinar is on a sponsor license and the sponsor license route available. So as I set the scene earlier on in the webinar, and if you did identify yourself going through that current employee situation where you need more employees, you need to stabilize your employee figures, and you are looking to hire migrants but just don't know the way to go about it, the sponsor license is the answer for you. So a sponsor license is a license granted by the Home Office to UK businesses, which is valid for a period of 4 years. And within those 4 years, you are able to sponsor individuals from varying countries. Roshni will then later on go on to talk about the different individuals that you can hire in the process. But as it stands, a sponsor license is granted for 4 years. The question that I get quite a lot is, when you get your sponsor license, how many individuals and how many foreign workers can you hire? In this day and age, and with the Home Office, there is no limit. As long as you can show there is a genuine business need, there's a genuine vacancy, and the role has not been created for any fraudulent activity or to bring over any workers which won't be working for the company. So it is a very honourable license to have. We've noticed from individuals that we worked with, once they have obtained their sponsor license, their business goes from strength to strength, because they have those, they have the employees there that were able to work on their business to grow together and succeed as a whole. So a sponsor license in itself assists not only the business, but also those migrants who are looking to come over with or without their family. So I'm just going to move over to the next slide and pass over to Roshni regarding the sponsor license process itself.
Okay, so once you have obtained your sponsor license, something that you will have access to is the sponsorship management system, also known as the SMS, and what I will be referring to it as throughout the webinar. So one key feature of the SMS system is that it allows you to assign certificates of sponsorship to the prospective migrant employees that you wish to hire. So essentially, this is the process that you will need to carry out to input all the details of the individual you're looking to hire, including their date of birth, the job that they're coming to fulfill, and how long they're looking to work for your company.
As mentioned as well, a sponsor license is granted for a period of 4 years, but at that point, we can also assist with any renewals or sponsor license applications in the 4-year period. And if the company is flagged up by the Home Office for an audit, which is quite rare, but it does happen from time to time, that is something else that we can assist with. So although you are granted for a 4-year period, you need to be ensuring that you are being compliant and complying with all the Home Office rules and regulations to ensure that you are and you do have the best sponsor license in terms of the Home Office rules. One thing to also mention is with the sponsor license, they are rated. So what we at Woodcock Law aim to do is make sure that you are a rated sponsor license holder. That just means that you have the most flexibility with the Home Office. There are no caps on your sponsor license, and you are granted for a period of 4 years. If you have joined our webinar today, you're already a granted sponsor license holder and you are B rated or lower, do get in contact with us so that we can work with you to ensure that your sponsor license is up to the best possible point that it can be, and so that you are ensuring that you are compliant.
Okay, so in regards to the certificates of sponsorship, it is important to note that there are 2 kinds of certificates of sponsorship. So one being a defined certificate of sponsorship. So this refers to applications that are made outside of the UK. And then you'll have an undefined certificate of sponsorship. So that's mainly for individuals that are already in the UK, possibly switching over from a different visa route, either that being the graduate visa or the student visa, which is what we see quite often. The process itself for both are typically the same. You are required to fill out a mini application form, you may say. It's a very short form that you fill out, and it is something that the authorising officer does. And what you need for this part of the process is the individual's passports, their national insurance number if they have one, and if they are in the UK, and any other details that would be crucial for their employment at the company.
So moving on to stock code mapping, and again, the areas that we are covering in this segment are just the key mechanisms that make up a sponsor license application, as well as what we offer in our bespoke end-to-end service here at Woodcock Law Notary Public. So stock code mapping is a process that our team internally carries out. So what usually happens is any potential clients or potential sponsor license holders get in touch with us and provide us with a job description for their prospective migrant. What needs to be done to ensure that it is meeting the Home Office rules and regulations and also in line with Appendix Skilled Worker is the appropriate SOC code needs to be provided. So SOC code, as you can see, stands for Standard Occupation Classification. It is a 4-digit number that is assigned to any migrants, which then identifies not only their job role, their job description, and also their salary. So what the team do and what we are specialists in is making sure the correct SOC code is chosen for your migrant workers. It matches up with the role that you already had in mind, but perhaps wasn't tailored towards the Home Office. It is crucial that the SOC code mapping is carried out to ensure that the application has the best chance of success. A reason why we are also flagging up the SOC code mapping process at this stage, as part of the sponsor license application, there is a question relating to what clauses you need, so what certificates of sponsorship that you would need as part of your sponsor license application as a rule of thumb. And we will also be offering a top tip section at the end of the webinar. But just as an early top tip, what we always recommend is going with one certificate of sponsorship, so one vacant position for the purposes of the sponsor license, just to make sure that you can obtain that sponsor license. Once granted, you do have the the variability to actually extend and add on certificates of sponsorships as and when the business requires them. So SOC code mapping is something that we do offer here. SOC code mapping is very, very important and crucial to both this application, so the sponsor license, and any potential visa applications that would follow. So if you have any questions about the SOC code mapping process, you yourself are looking at any of your vacancies, are unsure of which job roles would be applicable, whether you have the salary correct, do get in contact with us through our free 30-minute webinar consultation that we are offering today.
So when carrying out the sponsor license application process, you will need to appoint an authorising officer for the purposes of the sponsor licenses. So this essentially will be the individual that will manage the sponsor license and report any changes to the migrant's employment. This could be either an increase or decrease in pay, a change of work location, maybe termination of contract in some cases. The individual who you authorise as the authorising officer will also need to be a senior member of your company. So whether this be a member of HR or it could be a director of the company. And we do recommend that they are either a British citizen or have settlement in the UK, as we've seen that this gets flagged less often than individuals who are not.
Following on from what Roshni said about the authorising officer, if you have joined the webinar today and you are currently fulfilling the role as authorising officer, or it is something that you are considering taking up, please do note that there is an option to replace your authorising officer once granted. It is a situation or scenario which does crop up, from time and time again with individuals that we currently work with. So if a authorising officer does need to be replaced for whichever reason it may be, so they're leaving the firm, they no longer have the capacity to deal with this particular role, then it is something that we can assist with and make sure that you have the correct paperwork in place to make sure your new authorising officer is on the live sponsor management system. Again, and we cannot stress this enough, compliance is a major thing with the Home Office. So making sure you are being compliant, making sure your authorising officer is present and able to fulfil the role is something that we cannot stress enough. So any questions about the authorising officer, do let us know in the Q&A session. More than happy to take any questions relating to this. So I'm just going to pass over to Roshan so she could touch base on the SMS system.
Thanks, Papia. So just touching base upon what you can do with the SMS system. So as mentioned previously, one of the key features of that is assigning certificates of sponsorship to the prospective migrant employee that you wish to hire. Another thing that you can do is manage key personnel. So you can appoint a level 1 user or a representative. In many cases, individuals do assign us to be their representatives, and that's something that we can do. So that just means that, you have us to manage your sponsor license and make sure that you are being compliant with the Home Office requirements. You can also report changes of circumstances. You can add sponsor notes. So this again refers to changes such as termination of contract, change of work location, dates of employment that might need changing, or an increase or decrease in pay. You can also use this to upgrade and renew sponsor licenses, which is done every 4 years, as mentioned previously by Papia.
Perfect. So we have reached the end of our first segment. So by this point, you should be able to identify whether or not your company, or if you are watching us live today through the webinar, whether you would need a sponsor license and whether or not it would benefit your company as it stands today. You should also be able to identify the nuts and bolts of what goes into the sponsor license system before granting, whilst granted, and after being granted. And you should know about some of the services that we do offer here. So I'm just going to move on to the second segment of this webinar, which will focus quite closely on the sponsor license application itself, which I'm sure a lot of you have joined us on the call today to actually look into and be more informed about. So as I mentioned, we are offering a free 30-minute consultation with any of the webinar individuals who have joined us today. So as part of the screening, what a specialist member of our team would do is carry out the initial screening stage with you as a potential sponsor license holder. So as part of this initial screening, what we often ask for prior to the call is your company house registration number or the full name of your company, just so that we can locate you on Companies House, check things like your filing history, the appointments made, check your incorporation date. This is quite important, as your incorporation date will determine the type of application that we would be submitting in terms of documentation. For example, if you had just incorporated about a month ago, you would be flagged up as a startup company, and therefore the documents that you would need to provide would vary ever so slightly to those who have been incorporated for over the 36-month period. So again, we will carry out our due diligence and checks prior to the initial screening and also during the call, just to go through and run through with you what we would identify as possible flags in your application, but also the green lights for us to proceed. In addition, and as part of the initial screening, we will also ask if you have an accountant in place. If you don't have an accountant, we may be able to point you in the right direction. Reason for asking about the accountant and also for the financial background for the company is in relation to the documentation and the HMRC filings you would need to provide. Further information will be provided shortly, so I won't speak too much about that right now. But also as part of the initial screening, we will be asking for a breakdown of your employee structure and just a summary of your current company and what it is that you are looking for assistance with, just so that we can make sure it is being tailor-made to your company, to your needs, and to where you want to be as a company in a few years' time. So finding out your employee breakdown and where your vacancies currently are very, very helpful in both the certificate of sponsorship and also the SOC code mapping process, and also in determining where we can assist and make and foster a long-term relationship, because a lot of the clients that we work with aren't just one-off cases. We do start with the sponsor license, identify the first vacancy, and by the end of us obtaining the sponsor license and doing the first visa application, we would have fostered a long-term relationship where we then assist with any employee vacancies going on the next few years. Again, and the last thing that we would go through in the initial screening is supporting documentation. So I will move on to the supporting documentation, as this will take up quite a large part of this webinar, as it is a fundamental part of doing a sponsor license application. So just so you are aware, once you have submitted a sponsor license application, you do have up to 5 working days to provide all the documentation in line with Appendix A of the Home Office rules and regulation. So what we do here at Woodcock Law Notary Public, and to make sure that we are thorough, we make sure that all documentation is reviewed by our principal solicitor, Nathan Woodcock, who's also conveniently our notary public, but he ensures that all documentation is in line with Appendix A, flags up any issues prior to us submitting, just so that we aren't in a rush when it comes to the 5-day period where we need to submit. Again, as we like to be thorough and make sure that we are hitting any benchmark that we can, we like to submit the documentation to the Home Office on 2 attempts if possible. So once just before the deadline, so the 5th day deadline, and also on the deadline date. I will speak more about the process in terms of what happens after submitting later on as we go through the process. So in terms of supporting documentation, and in line with Appendix A offered by the Home Office guidelines, you do only need to provide 4 mandatory documents. However, having been in the specialist team for the sponsor licenses for Woodcock Law Notary Public, we always suggest hitting towards a 5 to 6 documents mark, just because the more documentation you can provide, the better it is for your application. It also gives you a bit of leeway if one of your documents isn't satisfactory or sufficient in the eyes of the Home Office. So I'm just going to run through the core 8 documentation that I usually suggest and usually go through in the initial screening, just so I can map out where we would be taking the call on and how we would be assisting in your situation. So you can see on my screen, we do have 8 documents. So the first one is the employer's liability insurance for at least 5 million. This is a mandatory document where we would suggest that you get in contact with an insurance broker. Again, we can only comment on this from an immigration point of view, and we can offer you assistance in terms of what the Home Office expects you to have. So any insurance related questions would need to be asked directly to your insurance broker. That being said, we are more than happy to look through any quotations from an immigration standpoint, just to make sure that it does have the necessary things for the Home Office application. So once you've obtained your employer's liability insurance, along with the paperwork that is usually provided by the insurance broker, we would be requesting the certificate relating especially and directly to the employer's liability insurance, and it needs to cover 5 million. We've had some companies offer us certificates which quote 10 million, which is fine. As I said, the borderline mark is 5 million, so 5 million over would be satisfactory for the Home Office. Moving on to current financial report or audited annual report. This is one that is up for debate and conversation, and that is something that I would further discuss in an initial call, just because not every single company is audited, which we can completely understand, as you do need to meet the threshold in order to be an audited business. So in the event you can't provide us with a audited annual report, we would be more than happy to obtain your unaudited version. Just bear in mind that this will not count towards your for supporting documentation goal. But again, the more documentation that we can provide that is relevant, we can add in. And also we can flag it up in our supporting cover letter that we do with every single application that's submitted to the Home Office, just to ensure that you are meeting the requirements and that the application has the best chance of success. Moving over to HMRC, payee and VAT. Again, these are requirements that we would ask you to check with your accountant. HMRC payee is a non-negotiable. We would always recommend that you have your payee set up. If you are a startup company, you've only incorporated in the last month, 6 months, whatever it may be, we would always recommend that you get payee set up with HMRC, just because if you are sponsoring migrant workers, they do need to be on your payroll. They need to be paid the appropriate salary that would be given during the stock code mapping process. So payee and the payroll needs to be set up as a mandatory item. The next thing is the HMRC VAT. Again, this is another one that could be up for discussion in the initial screening conversation that we do have, just because I do understand not every single company is eligible for VAT and doesn't meet the threshold. So again, this is something that we can discuss with you and your accountant, just to see whether or not it is a process that can take place, just because the VAT documentation does weigh quite heavily. So if you are able to get the VAT certification HMRC documentation, we would highly recommend it. Moving on to the CT600 and CT603. In the event you can't provide the CT603, the CT620 are applicable as well. So again, these documents we would run through with your accountant, just to bear in mind, the CT603 is no longer published by HMRC in certain situations. So if you are affected by this, do let us know in the initial screening, just so that we can put together a recovery pack for you to make sure that you know what other documents can be provided in its absence. One thing I do want to flag up as well with the CT600 and CT603, this is the only one that comes in a pair. So unfortunately, if you don't have the CT603 or you don't have the CT600, you wouldn't be able to tick and qualify for providing the supporting documentation. We can only tick the checklist if we've got both in this situation. In the event that you've only received the CT600, we can address that in the cover letter, just to make sure that you have both documentation in place. Sorry, I do think our lights have gone off, so I think my colleague Russian is just going to activate the lights again. So moving on with the remainder of the documentation. So for the business bank statements, we do require the last 3 months of business bank statements to be provided in support of your application. The main thing to consider when providing us with bank statements is that they do need to be FCA recognised and also on the Bank of England's prudential list, just to make sure that they are also Home Office authorised. In the event that your bank does not meet those criterions, we will discuss this with you in a separate meeting, just to make sure that you do have this in place. In the event that you are a startup and are unable to provide your last 3 months of bank statements, this does happen quite a lot in practice, and it is a common thing that does occur. What we would suggest is that you attend your branch or call the head office and obtain a letter from the bank, just confirming the dealings that it's had with you. And again, we can provide you specialist assistance with this. Final 3 that I'm just going to whiz through. So proof of ownership or lease. As part of the sponsor license application, you do need to disclose the place of where the business will be operating from. If this is different to the one registered on Companies House because it's a different operational address, again, that is something that we will address in the meeting and work with you to make sure you have the correct documentation. For governing body registration, so if you have joined our webinar today and you come from a background of having a restaurant, having a off license or a convenience store, or you are an accountant who has joined today, you will be accredited by a governing body. So the example we have on the screen is a food standards agency. That is just one of many examples. So if you are an accredited body, or if you have been accredited by any of the organizations that I've mentioned, there is an exhaustive list. So we can discuss this in the initial screening, but any accreditations and documentation relating to this can also be provided in support of your application. And again, if you are able to provide it, it's just another tip that you can have from the Home Office. So we will work with you to make sure that if you are identifiable with this, that you provide the correct documentation. And the final thing, which actually doesn't count as support documentation, but is required for the submission of the application, is a company hierarchy chart, again confirming where the vacant position would lie. So when the team is going through the SOC code mapping process, they will again work with you to make sure you have a company hierarchy chart in place and that the vacant position does match up with the SOC code that we are proposing. So again, only 4 needs to be provided. The more you can give, the better it is for your application. So moving on to application processing. So in the event we've sorted out your authorizing officer, we've sorted out the documentation list that you've got, we've completed the SOC code mapping process, you should be at a position where you can submit the application. So what usually happens and what we like to do is we like to book in a one-to-one meeting with the company holder, so usually the director or the individual that has instructed us for this application. We will review it on a Teams call or a Zoom meeting just to make sure that all the details for the application are correct and that we can support you with the submission. Once submitted, as I mentioned, we do have to provide documentation within 5 working days, which is why throughout the process we do advise and strongly recommend that we are providing documentation as we go through the process to make sure that we're not in a last minute panic trying to get all the documents in place. Once submitted, there are one of 3 things that may happen, and this is just from our experience whilst working here at Woodcock Law Notary Public. So option 1, and this is the best outcome that could possibly happen to anyone, is getting your grant within the 8-week mark. So the standard turnaround time for a sponsor license currently in the UK is 8 weeks from the point of being submitted. Usually we see a notification being posted by week 7 or week 8. So within that time scale, you should have an outcome reached. The earliest and the quickest turnaround time that I've ever had is 2 weeks. But this was pre-COVID, and the amount of Home Office applications right now are, increasing. So it is something to just bear in mind. It may just be the standard 8-week timescale. In addition to this, priority service is available. So the first 50 that are chosen by the priority route can also be applicable. If you need further details about this process, do let me know. It is offered on a case-by-case basis and based on your needs. Also, if you are selected, you do have to make the additional payment of £500 to the Home Office. Fees we will cover later on in the slides. Again, I mentioned there is one of 3 things that can happen. So first one is you get granted within the 8-week point. Secondly, if they're not satisfied at that point and they do flag you as complex because of the nature of your work, or they are in the season of looking into any applications and taking a closer look, they may request for further details about your HR system. And again, that's a further information request, so we can assist you with that. If by that point and they're still not satisfied, they may wish to audit you at the residence that you have provided. This may be unannounced or planned. So we have had situations where some of our clients have had an unannounced home office visit. In the event that this did happen, they did just reach out to us, and we were able to provide them with a briefing of what to say to the home office, and also to ensure that the process goes quite smoothly. So as I mentioned, one of three things could happen. Hopefully we are just aiming to work towards an 8-week turnaround time and to get the application granted in the first attempt.
Okay, so just touching base on some of the fees that you'd be required to clear on your end. Just please note these are reflective of the Home Office fees. They are correct as of today. However, these are subject to change, and these are not reflective of our professional fees. So going on to the sponsor license application fee, so you'll only be required to pay one fee for the sponsor license process. So that being £536 for small or charitable sponsors. So this consists of 1 to 50 employees, and it's the one that we see more often, or £1,476 for larger organisations, so organisations consisting of around 50 or more employees. Going on to the skilled worker fees, because that's the process thereafter that you will need to pay for as well. So you will need to pay a certificate of sponsorship assignment fee. So this is applicable to all employees that you're looking to hire. And that's £199. And then you have the skilled worker application fee, and this is for 3 years or less. So you'll need to pay £625 if you're making an out-of-country application, or £704 if you're making an in-country application. Moving on to the immigration skills charge, which is what you'll pay at the point of assigning the certificate of sponsorship. It will be £1,092 for 3 years, and then you'll have the immigration health surcharge, which will be paid at the point of submission, which is £1,872 for 3 years. So please note, with the immigration skills charge and immigration health surcharge, this does vary depending on whether you'll pay based on whether the individual is already in the country and are switching over from a student visa and a graduate visa, or if their occupation is on the shortage occupation list. So any jobs that are in high demand, you will not need to pay for the immigration skills charge or the immigration health surcharge. And as with any individual that is already in the UK and switching over, they will also not be required to pay these fees.
So touching base on what Roshni said, and in addition to the home office fees, we also have our fees here at Woodcock Law Notary Public. So we do offer a bundle package for the sponsor license application and one skilled worker visa. Our fees do start from £6,500 onwards. But again, this is something that we can discuss in a consultation setting. So if you do have any questions about our fees, or you wish to just speak about the home office fees as well, do get in contact with us. So moving on to the final segment of this webinar, we will be focusing on the case studies section of this, just because, as I mentioned, we have been working for Woodcock Law Notary Public for several years now, and we have had some interesting cases whilst being here, both on the sponsor license front and on the skilled worker front, which come hand in hand. As you can see on the screen, we have worked with a variety of businesses, most of which you can see are not your typical businesses that you would assume would need a sponsor license, but nevertheless have reached out and have now got their sponsor license. So starting with my one, I will be speaking about the Halal Butchers, who are based in Sheffield, and typically what happened is they reached out to me through a mutual contact that we had, and they were in the process of getting ready for the period of Ramadan, and they needed individuals to join them. They had 3 premises around the Sheffield area, and they were severely understaffed, and it was affecting not only their figures but also the mental health of their current employees. They weren't aware that they needed a sponsor license. They had the assumption, which a lot of people do have, that we can just bring people over through a visa and everything would be okay in terms of the Home Office. What they failed to recognise is that they needed a sponsor license first. So what I did is I carried out the initial conversation with them. We screened them out and deemed them to be eligible. And then we got to working on their sponsor license and the documentation. Thankfully, when a lot of our clients do reach out, they already have a lot of the documents. They just don't understand or are aware that the documents that they do hold can be used for the sponsor license application. So we went through the documentation, submitted it via the priority route. As I understood, it was quite a stressful time for them in terms of their own timelines for their business. They did want 15 to 20 skilled workers from the Pakistan region to join them. So we had already negotiated on the fee front and also put a plan of action in place to make sure that we could bring them over. So what happened is we submitted that application. They unfortunately did get asked for an audit, which did prolong the period, not for too long, but just for a few weeks. They went through the unannounced audit, which did happen. They were able to go through the audit without any issues, as we had coached them prior to the audit actually happening. They were able to answer the questions correctly. The support documentation we had given was further support of this. They were then granted the application, and they have been granted for several years now. And what we have done, we are on number 15, I think, or 16 of the skilled workers that we are bringing over. And as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, the purpose of a sponsor license is to help and enrich your business. It's to help stabilize your employee figures. And for the halal butchers that we currently have, their business has grown from strength to strength, and their employee figures right now are probably the most stabilized it has been since they incorporated in about 1979. So they've been operating for a long time. They just didn't know that they had a solution at the doorstep effectively, which we have now helped with, and we have a long-standing relationship with them, and also other industries in their area, which also then reached out to us because they realized that they could also benefit from a similar thing. So that was my story. So I'm going to pass over to Roshni, who I think has a very different story.
I do indeed. So another sector that we have tapped into is the beautician sector. So very different to papiers and very different from halal butchers. So essentially, this was a newly incorporated company, and they were looking to bring over 2 individuals to work for their company as masseuses. So the first issue that we came across with this particular scenario was that there was no specific stock code for a masseuse. So what we needed to do in this situation was we needed to cater the stock codes that we were able to use under tradable points A, and basically cater it to the individuals they were bringing over to ensure that it covered, touched all bases upon what jobs they were going to carry out and the minimum salary. And this was absolutely fine. This was not flagged by the Home Office at any point. Later on during the process, the company was audited, and as you can imagine, it was a newly incorporated company, so they didn't have a proper HR system in place at the time. Records were not necessarily, kept up to date, but it was, very new, so it wasn't hard for them to catch up with this. So what we did was we offered them a mock audit package, which is where we helped them to ensure that they had a proper HR system in place. We helped to ensure that all their records were up to date, and we prepared them for any questions that the Home Office were essentially going to ask.
Perfect. And just to touch base, because I know I'm not heavily involved in this case that you've mentioned, what's going on with the beauticians right now? I know they do also work in Canary Wharf, which is where we're located. Where have you got up to with them? And in terms of business planning, how has the sponsor license helped them?
Okay, so since then they did bring over the 2 individuals to work for the company, and they've brought over another 5 individuals on slightly different stock codes and different job roles. And the company itself have actually expanded significantly. So they've made a vast amount of progress since we have worked on this sponsor license for them.
Perfect. So as you can see, we have a lot of different companies that do reach out. Some of them have varying opportunities that they're wishing to put into their business. They have a lot of vacancies that they're wishing to fulfill, but they just don't know the right way to go about it. So we are able to tailor make any packages around the type of business that you have, the vacancies that you have. Depending on what your business is, to be honest, we have worked with so many variations that I don't think we would be surprised at this stage. I think one of my most notable ones was working with a piggery farm. So it's been quite an interesting one. I know Roshni's also worked on quite a few unique cases, to put it politely. So it has been quite a lovely experience to work with all these different individuals. And again, we are more than happy to help with individuals that don't know if the sponsor license route is fine for them, or if it is something that aligns with their business. If you would like to find out a bit more about the work that we have done, or if you identify yourself with any of the ones that are listed on the screen, do feel free to get in touch. As I said, we are, experts in our field, and it is something that we would be more than delighted to carry on the conversation with you after this webinar. Just to close off the webinar before we do head into our Q&A session, which I do think we have enough time for, we are going to wrap up this webinar with our top tips. So as I mentioned, me and Roshni have been working here for quite some time, and we've had quite a varying amount of experiences and exposures with the Home Office and also our clients. So these are just a few of our top tips that we picked up along the way. So firstly, it is supporting documentation. Again, I can't stress this enough. Although the mandatory is 4 documents, we always suggest hitting the 5 or 6 mark. The more documents you can provide, the more leeway it provides you, and also it adds credibility to your company for the Home Office application. Again, VAT registration, if you are able to register your company for VAT and you've had a conversation with your accountant, then we would highly recommend it, just because it's another credible piece of evidence that we can provide to the Home Office. Authorising officers, Roshni mentioned earlier on in the meeting, is a crucial role that you would need to undertake. It's something that needs to be disclosed to the Home Office from the get-go of starting the application. And again, we advise for a British citizen within your firm and possibly someone who works in HR to take up this role, just because it helps the system. It helps streamline the process a bit more. Again, HR system, and what I did stress throughout this webinar is being compliant with the Home Office. It is very important that you have a HR system that is fully functioning and running. If this is something that you don't currently have in place, or you want us to review in line with the Home Office rules and regulations, that is something, again, that we can offer and tailor make to you and your business. Second to last is registering with any relevant governing body. So again, if you are regulated by any accredited body, so whether that's ACCA if you're an accountant, or the Food Regulation Authority if you are a food enterprise, all of those documentations will support your application, and it will benefit rather than hinder any applications made to the Home Office. Final one is a business bank account. The reason why I have put this one in here is I have had several cases where individuals are not banking with the wrong provider per se, but in terms of the Home Office, we do need to make sure that they are FCA and PRA approved. So just making sure that you do have the correct bank set up, and if not, then we do have separate one-to-one meetings that we can have with you to advise accordingly. So what I will do is I will now open up the floor to any questions that you may have. I hope you have found this webinar interactive and informative. Any questions that you may have or that you thought about throughout this webinar, please do let us know. We are opening up the floor now. If you would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand and we will be able to select from the participants that are listed on the screen. Perfect. I think we've got our first question in from an individual who's asking whether or not the priority route is available to them because they need it urgently. So as I mentioned earlier on, if you are in a urgent need for a sponsor license because you have, X amount of vacancies, then it is something that we can offer. As I mentioned earlier on, I was quite brief about it just because it is on a case-to-case basis. We do assess eligibility as we go through the process. But the priority route is available. It is an extra £500 on top of the 536 that you would originally pay if you are an SME. So again, that is available, and that is something that we can discuss. So if you would like to leave me your contact details, we can take forward that conversation and actually find out a bit more about your business prior to confirming what route would be available to you.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
No. What are the consequences for businesses that don't use your knowledge, know-how?
Okay, perfect. So this is actually a question I have quite frequently from a lot of potential clients that haven't signed on as of yet. So what I've seen whilst working here and working in immigration law is if you do submit an application without any full legal representation, not to say that individuals aren't able and capable to submit it yourself, but there have been quite a few occasions where applications have been refused. If an application is refused for a sponsor license, there is a risk that you can be banned for 6 months as well. So that is something to bear in mind. There is no real risk for not using any legal representation, but we always strongly advise it for both the sponsor license, so you can avoid any refusals, avoid getting the lower B-rated license, and also so you can have assistance. So that will be end-to-end assistance with the visa application process itself. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I can't see who asked.
That's lovely. Thank you.
No worries. Are there any other questions from any of our webinar participants today?
There are 2 hands up. You've got Theo and the other one's just jumped off my screen. Hold on. Edua, who's an HR consultant. I think she had her hand up first. So if you'd like
Okay.
to go to her.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Okay,
perfectly fine.
fantastic. And thank you so much. It was an excellent session. What I wanted to ask specifically about is I'm an independent HR consultant, and I just wanted to sort of find out more about what my responsibilities would be as an authorizing officer and what sort of HR systems that I need to sort of put in place to help my clients.
That's fine. Would you like to answer?
Yeah, so I will take the part regarding the authorising officer and what you would have to do. So essentially, you will be the individual that will be responsible for reporting any changes to the migrant's employment. So this is something that is a requirement from the Home Office. And essentially, if you're not compliant with this and you're not keeping up to date, that is something that could pose a risk to your actual sponsor license, and it could put your sponsor license, at risk of being revoked. So essentially, anything such as employment changes, any work location change, that will be your responsibility, as well as actually assigning the certificate of sponsorship. So in this situation where you do terminate a contract, that does need to be reported to the Home Office immediately, as does any changes in salary.
In addition to what Roshni said, and what's actually quite useful, and I know we are quite niche in offering this, is there is the opportunity, and we do this with all of our clients. We are a boutique firm, but we do currently have about 41 sponsor licenses that we are currently managing. So for all of those, what we do is put Woodcock Law Notary Public down as a legal representative, and then our principal solicitor, Nathan Woodcock, then goes down also as a level 1 user. So any emails you would potentially get as an authorising officer would then also be sent over to us as your legal representatives to make sure that you're not missing any important emails from the Home Office, and so we can advise you as part of the long-lasting, business relationship that we do tend to build with all of our clients. In relation to your second question about the HR system, again, this is something that we can speak to you more about in a consultation if that is what you would like, but just to touch on it briefly, because I am aware Theo is waiting as well. With the HR system, what is really important, again, and I know I have mentioned this and stressed it a lot, is compliance. So making sure you are doing things like right to work check, making sure that all documentation for any of your employees are on the system, whether that's a Google Drive, a official HR system that you externally have. But what we do as part of our end-to-end service is we will go through your HR system and flag up anything from a Home Office auditor's point of view, just so you can get that fixed in time for a potential audit. As I mentioned, audits aren't, they're not common, they are quite rare, but we like to make sure each and every one of our clients are, the best equipped and well prepared for any potential audits that may happen. So again, just making sure your HR system has everything that you would expect a functioning business to have, that is compliant with any working rules. So, right to work, making sure that all BRP cards and passports are valid and full, and having those on the system. If you would like more information about this, do feel free to book in a consultation just so we can go through it more. I know we are on time constraints right now, but I hope that does offer you a bit of insight into both parts of your question.
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you so much.
No worries, pleasure. Theo, if you can hear me, please could you ask your question? I think we are ready for your question.
Sure. Thank you so much for a great session. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Great. So I do have 3 questions. The first is there a minimum company turnover requirement?
So I'll take this question first and then you can ask me the rest of them. So in terms of turnover, that is actually a question I get so frequently from a lot of directors actually as well. So one thing to note is the Home Office doesn't actually look at your turnover. The reason why they would want your business bank statements is to show that you are trading, you are a legitimate company, but they're not concerned about your turnover. Just to put it into a bit more of a perspective, I guess, I've worked with a company that had about 50 quid in their bank account, and I've worked with companies that were making millions. So it does vary, but it's not a requirement from the Home Office. They're not interested in how much your turnover is. The only thing they may flag up if you get to an audit stage is whether or not you have the correct and sufficient amount to sponsor a migrant, so to be able to pay a salary. So again, that's something that we would just discuss with you. But in terms of turnover, no.
Okay, great. That's an interesting point. I would think that there would be a minimum requirement so that you can handle the salary requirement from your employees. So thank you. I understand that. then you mentioned earlier that the skills charge or healthcare surcharge wouldn't need to be paid if the person was already in the UK. So I'm currently on a 2-year startup visa, looking to see if I can become a sponsor when I move into my next 3-year segment. And the healthcare surcharge is definitely a requirement to be paid. So can you explain that, please?
I'll take this question. So essentially, with the whole being in the UK, that is only specific to certain visas. So if you're switching over from a student visa or a graduate visa, that is the case. You wouldn't have to pay the immigration skills charge or the immigration health surcharge. Again, it is very specific to the visa you're on. So that would need to be discussed slightly further in detail. You know, it changes depending on the individual and their current situation. Again, another situation in which you wouldn't need to pay that is if your job is going to be on the shortage occupation list. So we have done many health and care visas, health and care jobs, and we have seen that they've never had to pay the immigration skills charge or the immigration health surcharge purely because there is a high demand for them in the UK currently.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
Appreciate that. And the final question is, as a startup, what would be the biggest red flags that I need to worry about? I am VAT registered. I have done the PAYE.
Yeah, so with a startup, and a lot of my clients actually do end up being startups because they are looking to broaden their company. So it is a sponsor license that they usually go for. So for startups, the biggest red flags and one of the main requirements from the Home Office is your business bank account. Just because if you are a startup, some companies don't have a business bank account set up yet. So that is the one thing that we would be reviewing to make sure that you are on both those lists that I mentioned earlier. So make sure that you are FCA approved and also on the Prudential list with the Bank of England. That would be the main thing with the startup that they would look into, and also your HR systems to make sure that they are in place for any employees that you might have at that point. Again, for startups, we do offer consultations, particularly for those individuals, because it's always good to go through the entirety of the documentation list. As I understand, with startups, you don't always have the documentation in place. So a lot of the startups that reach out to me either haven't got their banking set up or they don't have the employer's liability insurance set up. So it's things like that that we would make sure are in place prior to proceeding with submitting the application.
Great, thank you very much.
No worries. Are there any other questions from anyone who's joined the webinar today?
Iwa has got their hand up.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Lovely to meet you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay,
What is your
do you also support or assist companies which are medical practices and would like to recruit someone from EU?
Of course, this is something actually I've worked with quite a few different medical practices, a lot of them around Harley Street actually. So it is something that we can support, but for individuals and for businesses like this, we would need a full consultation with you just so I can understand your background a bit more and the individuals that you do want to hire. So for purposes of the webinar, if you are able to get in contact with me after the call, or what I can do is I can obtain the list of participants today and reach out. We can do this, but in a consultation setting, just because I need to know a bit more about the business and your intentions with the sponsor license. But it is something that I've worked on previously whilst being here at Woodcock Law.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Are there any final questions that we have before we wrap up today? We are able to take one final question if there are any.
If not, I've got another one.
Yes, yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, who's speaking?
I'm Terry. I
yes.
I have a background of the HR, so as in line with what the Adua just said, you know, to have somebody like you that they can fall back on is it's time-consuming effort to go through anyway and that is what you do. If say you had an HR company, could they maybe have a reduced rate for using you regularly and that you could monitor them? It's just a question to maybe sort of think of, because you know, if they've then got to put them costs on, it's yes, they're keeping their company safe and they've got them on a retainer, but also they've got you as a backing to say they could rely on you to make sure they're doing what they should be doing, because HR is busy enough as it is without all these additional processes. It's just something I think, because if they're using you quite a lot, you know, and I know also that a lot of people came on sort of later on, once your 30-minute consultation quote moved away from the screen.
Yeah.
So I think that people just need to know that. Maybe if you could sort of flag that up again so they could see that.
Yeah, that's actually on the next slide, so we'll be closing with that. But in terms of the question that you've raised, that is actually a question that has been asked by quite a few HR individuals that we work with within their company. It is something that is on a case-by-case basis. So if anyone in or who has joined the webinar today is in that position, we would need to review that on a case-by-case basis just to make sure that we are being compliant. And to make sure that it is in line with the Home Office rules and what you would like to take out from, collaborating with us. So I hope that does answer your question. And if anyone does have any further questions, as I said, our contact details are on the screen. Just going to click on. Okay, and as mentioned at the start of the call, and thank you, Terry, for flagging this up. For anyone who did not join our webinar when we did start, we are offering a free 30-minute consultation for SELC members who have joined our webinar today. Please do quote SELC30 if you are getting in contact with us via email, telephone, WhatsApp, whatever mode it may be, even LinkedIn. One of the team members will be delighted to offer you the consultation that we do offer currently. And for any non-SELC members, we do only offer a restricted 10-minute consultation. So again, you will be getting the full 30 minutes and have a full rundown of the sponsor license application, the screening process and the documentation, as well as any questions that you might have. So I will leave this on the screen for a few more seconds just so you can note this down. So if you do want to get in touch, please do let us know. We do have 30 locations over the UK. Me and Roshni are based in Canary Wharf in London, which is our head office, but we do have a variety of locations around the UK. So we should be able to get to you or video call you from wherever you are located in the UK or around the world. So I'm just going to move on to our closing slides. So we do thank you for attending this webinar. We hope you have found it useful. Our contact details again are on the screen. It has been a pleasure to host this webinar along with Roshni and South East London Chamber of Commerce. We are from Woodcock, Royal Notary Public. Thank you for attending.
Okay, thank you, Papia and Roshni. Really excellent presentation, and thank you very much for your time. I know it takes a lot to put this all together, and we also spoke before the presentation, and that you could actually give us some more presentations on other areas, and we'll sort of advertise those out to people. So really thank you very, very much for all what you've done. Excellent.
You're very welcome. Pleasure being here.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.